equal. So this is part of our culture, part of our ethos, part of who we want to be as a nation. And Martin Luther King Day is a recognition, in a way, of that large statement. And it's a statement we've really struggled with over the years as a country, over the centuries as a country, and still struggle with. A lot has been done. There is a lot more to be done. I will come back to that, but let's get off on things. So I was just for Gringe yesterday. This was not a long search. I did one quick Google search and followed the first couple of links, and I ended up on a page of some Chicago list, and it was all the different ways that Martin Luther King Day is being celebrated. And oh my goodness, there are like basketball games and cookouts. The one that I saw this one and I laughed and then I just stopped. It was the Martin Luther King Glow Parade. I don't know what a glow parade is, but it was just funny. It's a thing, a glow parade. It's a thing. And you know what? I hope it's a wonderful thing, and I hope they have a great time, and I hope a lot of people show up. And if they do, then next year it will be the second annual Martin Luther King Glow Parade. It'll really be a thing at that point. And then if it's really successful, I don't know what the corporation in Chicago would be. In Atlanta, it would be the third annual Coca-Cola Martin Luther King Glow Parade. As we just make these things. So this is coming from Beth and I were talking the other day, and I said, what am I going to talk about at the weekend? She said, I've got an idea. I used to work with somebody who she'd keep on doing this thing where things would become things. So it's like there's the chocolate dip fondue is a thing. Oh, do you know this is a thing now? It's like we've got permission to do this. Chocolate dip bacon is a thing now. So like you can go to, I saw this in a donut store one time. You got this little thing of chocolate dip bacon. And if you spot there's a thing going on in there, which my thing is chocolate. So we got this, and I used it partly intentionally, partly because it's just the way language works. There's these layers of things, so we're turning these things into things. There's this concretization of things, stuffing, just making stuff out of things. And at one level, Martin Luther King Day itself is a thing, and that's why all these other things are popping up to get added to it, because we just make it more and more concrete. And there's something really important and valuable in doing that, but there's also something to really watch out for. And that's where I want to talk about things. So, something, nothing. Nothing we tend to think of as being just void, emptiness, nihilism. But if you think about the construction of the word, it's no thing. It means there's not yet a thing that's come into formation. Something, this is something. But actually now we can start calling it what it is. And we can talk about that in a minute maybe. But when it's something, it's not yet a specific thing. So we veer to the extremes of nothing, emptiness, nihilism, and something, thing, concrete. Things separate. By definition, once something's a thing, it's not something else. So to make things out of things is to fragment. So this jumps right into the core Buddhist teaching of the 12-link chain of causation. I refer to this quite a lot, and for some reason today I want to step through it because I tend to take a lot of it for granted, but I'll just talk through the way that works. So for those of you not familiar with it, the core Buddhist teaching is that the nature of reality is dependent origination, which is everything arises together. Nothing has independent existence, including and in particular me, or in your case you, right? You. And so the practice, the insight practice, is of incrementally looking into this and seeing the non-self, the non-stuffness of stuff. So the 12-link chain of causation runs from ignorance, which classically is lack of knowledge of, lack of understanding of the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism. It's what it starts with. But ignorance is just really not seeing clearly, seeing from our own little lens, our own perspective. From ignorance arises volition, arises this movement into action, this movement into intention, into resolve. This is where karma comes from. In fact, karma is often translated as intention. So karma, which is the footprint we leave in our life of our actions, of our ego-driven actions, it starts to come out with intention. Out of intention comes consciousness and name and form, which are the aggregates. Well, it's not yet the aggregates, it's the tendency to that word. And it's stuffness, if you will. There's another formulation of the 12-link chain of causation, which is actually the 10-link chain of causation, and it comes down to consciousness and name and form co-rising. They're like two sheaves of wheat that lean on each other. They actually, this is kind of like quantum mechanics. Stuff doesn't exist without the observer doesn't exist without stuff. So you've got consciousness, name and form, and out of that come the five senses. So now you've got a way of actually engaging, a way of contact happening, and contact is what happens next. So we're starting to separate self from other at this point. Contact. And once there's contact, there's a feeling. Is this pleasant? Is this unpleasant? Is this neutral? If it's neutral, we tend not to notice. Circles right back to ignorance a lot of the time. If it's neutral, we tend not to notice. But is it positive or is it negative? If it's positive, we want more. If it's negative, we want less. Clinging. And then we get really hooked on it. Craving. And as we get really, really hooked on it, we start to draw really strong boundaries about it. And then it's becoming. And out of becoming, and we're right towards the end right now. So birth happens as the 11th step in this sequence. Birth, and then sickness, old age, and death. So there are lots of different ways of deconstructing that and looking at what the different levels actually mean. But what to take away from it is there's this whole sea of stuff, of layers of stuff that happens underneath the hood of our conscious awareness that comes into how we construct the worlds we live in. And this formation of things is a huge part of this, a huge part of it. What Buddha then does in the teachings typically is he deconstructs the 12-link chain of causation. You typically start with, if you get rid of birth, there's no becoming, and so you go on down. There are different places where it's most practically possible to intercept this, and noticing those feeling tones, noticing whether something feels pleasant or unpleasant, is a really good way to spot this cycle of becoming and interrupt it before it spirals into, I want more, I really hate that, get that away from me. So if we can come back from that place and spot this when we're at the feeling tone level, it's much easier to slow things down and break that cycle. So the context I use this a lot in is the Kaccayana Sutta, which it's actually the same teaching as in Tibetan, the Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyamika Karika, which is the fundamental wisdom of the middle way, one of the classic Mahayana texts and probably the foundational text for Mahayana thinking. It's also the same as the teaching of emptiness, with which we just chanted, the Heart Sutta. It's that teaching as well. But the Kaccayana Sutta, the middle way is defined as the middle way between existence, do it this way around, existence and non-existence. Existence is where the world is just full of things. Non-existence is where our nothing is void. So it's the middle way between those two. And what is this? It is just this dependent chain of causation and then undoing the chain of causation. It's just this. So this tendency to make things. This is a thing. Is kind of, it's on the one hand it's funny. On the other, so there's lots of perspectives. One, it's funny because you go around looking at the stuff we make things out of, and and that takes us to another one. It's kind of tragic because that's a thing now. So now we can have chocolate dipped bacon because it's a thing. Now we've got a Martin Luther King Globe Parade in Chicago. That's a thing, so maybe we can have one in Atlanta too. So it's kind of tragic that we're setting the world up, that we need permission by others naming, by this convention of naming and creating things. We need permission to do this. It's very convenient because we are in the world and we do have to move around in the world, and it's very, very convenient. It's very convenient. But the difficulty of it is the obstacle it puts in the path. So back to Martin Luther King Day. That's fundamentally about freedom. Specifically, it was freedom to vote, the right to vote, but it was a freedom. It was a way of a people receiving an important freedom. And Fannie Lou Hamer, she was the daughter of, I think she was the daughter of a sharecropper, who was very active in the civil rights movement. She, among other memorable things, said, "Nobody's free till everybody's free." So this idea of this thinging of things, it allows me to look at my freedom and it passes freedom out, and it's tricky because freedom is not a thing. So when we we're living in a really interesting time actually as it relates to this. There is still a lot to be done. There's a lot that has been done, and a place where this shows up right now is gender identity and gender identity rights. So Beth and I were at an event the other day where the MC said, what did he say? He said, "Guys, gals, welcome." Instead of saying welcome ladies and gentlemen, he said, "Welcome guys, gals and non-binary pals," which I think is just wonderful. It's just wonderful. And it is fun, and it's light-hearted, right? It's light-hearted, it is fun. But it's wonderful, and it's indicative to me of us moving into a space where we're able to let go of a lot of these constructs, to let go of a lot of these things we've created. There's a looseness and a beauty in that. The other edge of it, though, is out of this beauty and this looseness and this emergence of some kind of freedom, there's a tendency to, okay, so we've got a men's room and we've got a ladies' room. Let's relabel those guys and gals. So we've got a guys' room and a gals' room, and we need a non-binary pals room. What are we going to do with this? So then we all have arguments about the non-binary pals bathroom. And there's something important here where the conversation is important and the recognition of humanity is important, but we start getting into real trouble when we start, well, that's a thing, we start putting labels on it and putting compartmentalizing. There's something, right now, what's going on in Israel, with Israel and Palestine, obviously deeply traumatic and troublesome in the world and very divisive. There is a bill that is working its way through the Georgia legislature, which is addressing anti-Semitism, which is an important thing to address, absolutely, really important thing to address. But unfortunately what happens here is, again, we've made anti-Semitism a thing, and in making it a thing, lots of stuff gets accreted to it, and there are things being accreted to this bill that other populations, and in particular Muslim populations, find challenging. And the fact that this bill exists and a bill doesn't exist to protect the rights of Muslims in general, Palestinian Muslims in particular, who are having a hard time right now, that is also a consequence of this tendency to create things. If we come back to the middle for our practice, the heart of our practice is wisdom and compassion. The heart of our practice is seeing clearly and feeling compassion for all beings. It is really, really important, in sticking with the Israeli-Palestinian thing, it is really, really important for us to look after the rights of Jewish people. It really is. But the problem comes when we start deciding to do that through legislation. We create all these challenges. Not saying we don't legislate, but when we rely on legislation, we're relying on compartmentalization, and you can't compartmentalize freedom. Okay, let's pass legislation that everybody should love their neighbor. Great idea. Define love. Now enforce it. You cannot legislate. You really can't legislate compassion. So this isn't a presentation with any answers at all. It's a presentation that talks about the challenges of thinking, which is a really important, as a practical matter, it is really, really important that we have a Martin Luther King Day. Really important. Once a year we really come back and we remember. But just like going to church on Sunday and then going out and behaving badly during the rest of the week, it's not enough to just rely on that once a year. And it's not, and that one day a year, then bringing all these other events in, that's fun, and it makes it a little bit more sticky and a little bit more entertaining. Sure, but we've got to be really careful with what we're doing with that. And it comes back to the general practice that we have, which is in our practice is about trying to see things more clearly. So hopefully if we can bring attention to our tendency to create things, and as we do, legislation, events, magical days, all the rest, and as we do, the dark side of that is the separation and what we're putting aside, what we're not seeing, and the slowing down and really trying to bring it back into our hearts, our hearts and our lives. Freedom isn't even something of the heart. Freedom is life. Freedom is lived, which isn't even of the heart. Things, actually one thing I did need to mention, we think of things, as objects, but they're not. What is this? So the most obvious thing people say, it's a bell, and the more creative people will say, it's a bowl, or it's something you can throw trash in, all of which is true. But in its simplest sense, and you can't describe that. There aren't words for that. That's beyond the head and the heart. That's just simply life. So that's freedom. Freedom is that, right? It's not, but it's in the same way. You can't talk about it. You can't describe it. You have to be it. So let's all be freedom.